Alberta Premier Jason Kenney took his message to the heart of the U.S. oil patch to pitch oil executives and energy investors on the merits of operating and investing in Alberta's energy sector. In an interview, he said his message is, with BNN Bloomberg, he said his message is getting lots of interest.
Well, yes, I would say they are. Look, I just met with companies today and yesterday in the energy and chemical industries representing over $725 billion of market cap. And I'm also meeting with private equity firms with over $400 billion of assets under management. And these are companies that many of which employ thousands of Albertans and some other Canadians in other parts of the country. And I was talking to many of them about new future capital expenditures that will create jobs. I was talking today with companies that are looking at, in the next few years, at the low end, $100 million of additional investment to all the way up to north of $10 billion in prospective petrochemical facilities in Alberta. So whether it's up, mid, or downstream, there is very keen interest and a recognition that we have very strong fundamentals. On the petrochem side, cheap natural gas feedstock, with obviously on the oil side, the third largest reserves on Earth, low royalties, low business taxes. We're reducing the regulatory burden. We're getting more energy shipped. So there's a great story to be told here.
In any of these meetings, does anyone bring up Encana? Don't they say, hey, wait a minute, didn't I read something recently about Encana changing their headquarters, getting out of Calgary, going down to Denver? Does it cause them any concern?
No, nobody actually mentioned Encana, but I think a couple of the folks with whom I met today, I think I met 10 companies today, I think a couple of them mentioned that there were U.S. companies that withdrew from the Canadian energy sector and moved capital back south. And that's why I'm here. I mean, that's obviously the backstop of this. Alberta is going through its fifth year of economic Alberta is going through its fifth year of economic decline and stagnation, partly because of the flight of tens of billions of dollars of capital from Canada's energy sector to that in Texas and Oklahoma, Colorado, and North Dakota. That's why I'm down here. And we're not going to get that capital back unless we come here and make the point that we have got one of the best energy basins in the world. We are producing energy more efficiently. For example, cost of producing a barrel of bitumen has come down by about 30% in the past 5 years, and the carbon emissions are coming down. The environmental footprint is shrinking. So as long as we can continue shipping more energy, there's a bright future.
Now, when it comes to the Encana story, did you buy it that the company needed to go to the States to better tap a different investor base? I mean, the vast majority of the holdings are already by Americans anyway.
Yeah, I think that was, I got to tell you something. I was not disappointed to see that Encana's share price dropped by 10% after they announced that they were registering in Delaware. I will let shareholders make the final decision, but I was disappointed. You know, this is a company that was built on Canadian workers, Canadian assets, Canadian leadership in the past. And the truth is that they were overextended on the natural gas side of things, obviously, before prices crashed, and they've suffered the results of that. But all I can tell you is that Alberta has the third largest oil reserves on Earth, one of the largest natural gas reserves. We've reduced the cost of production. We're reducing taxes on businesses, reducing red tape, speeding up the approvals process through additional crude by rail, additional pipeline optimization, Line 3 in the year 2021. We're going to be shipping several 100,000 additional barrels of crude in the next year to 18 months. There is a real path forward until we get a major coastal pipeline built. And I'm not going to be distracted by companies like Encana making that decision.
Now, as you're in Texas trying to drum up interest in investing in Canada's oil patch, of course, part of that story is the uncertainty about government policy. You have those concerns, obviously, with Ottawa. Today, they swore in a new cabinet. Chrystia Freeland has basically been charged with trying to get everyone to get along with each other. Are you looking forward to working with Ms. Freeland? Do you think you can make some progress with her?
Yes, you know, I was actually pleased to see that Chrystia Freeland was appointed Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs, and I gather also Deputy Prime Minister. She's a very intelligent and competent woman. who proved herself in the Foreign Affairs Ministry. For me, more importantly, she grew up in Alberta, near Fairview in northern Alberta. And so I think she understands that the oil and gas industry is an essential part of the Canadian economy. I know she now represents a downtown Toronto constituency, but I think she's somebody with whom we can speak. Her family still lives in Alberta. I was also pleased to see a new Minister of the Environment. Quite honestly, the previous Minister, Encana, did not seem to understand the central importance of the energy sector to the future of Canadian prosperity. And I hope we can have a more constructive relationship with this new Trudeau cabinet. We'll certainly be reaching out to try to find common ground, to hopefully to get an equivalency agreement with the federal government on our levy on major industrial carbon emitters, our TIER fund, which is for Technology, Innovation and Emissions Reduction Fund. I hope to get an equivalency agreement on between federal and provincial methane regulations and clean fuel standards. And we have a number of other short-term items which would be an opportunity for the federal government to demonstrate good faith to Alberta at a time of economic adversity when, unfortunately, a growing number of my fellow Albertans feel like they're not at home in their federation. So I'm looking forward to speaking with Minister Freeland and, frankly, Prime Minister Trudeau about that in the near future.
Some of these issues you're raising, of course, in your Fair Deal panel. Leo DeBeaver, former head of AIMCO, was on with us the other day, and he said, you know, he understands what you're doing. He thinks you're raising a stink just to get noticed, and you're not all that serious about things like pulling out a CPP and some other things you've said. Is he hitting the nail on the head there?
No, I think he's mistaken. We are very serious about asserting our role in the Canadian Federation to get a fair deal, and we are keeping an open mind about what that might constitute. One idea would be prospectively establishing our own Alberta pension plan, like Quebec has operated its own plan for over 60 years quite successfully. There have been papers produced by AIMCO since he left the organization which suggest that under AIMCO management, the $40 to $45 billion of Albertans' premiums that are currently managed by the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board could produce equivalent returns at lower premiums. Because Alberta has the youngest population in the country, we effectively make a net contribution, a transfer to the rest of the country through the CPP of about $3 billion a year. That's a portion of the over $20 billion net that we contribute to the rest of the Federation each year. So he has said that. The Fraser Institute has come out with a similar study. Professor Jack Mintz, one of the leading policy and tax experts in the country, has validated these views. So first of all, we're going to consult with Albertans. If they say we should do this, we'll do a deep technical dive into it. Thirdly, we would only proceed with extricating ourselves from the CPP if it was approved by a majority of Albertans in a poll. But I certainly think it's worth studying. It's worth Alberta looking at how we can maximize the advantage of having the youngest population in the country.
Now, I know you've said you're an avowed Federalist. Scott Moe has said the same thing, but you do have concerns about the way, things are structured right now. Is there a danger as the voting public, as the residents of Alberta get angrier and angrier in some of these issues, that we lose control of that? We get in a position where people want to separate Canada? I've heard you say before, you don't want to see Canada broken up.
Yes, there is a danger, and the wrong approach would be for political leaders to deride or dismiss this increasing frustration in Western Canada and the prairies in particular. Recent polling indicating a third of Albertans would support separating from the Canadian Federation. And what's more worrisome to me is 75 or 80% of my fellow Albertans say that they understand or appreciate the separatist sentiment, so they can sympathize with it. So this is not a small group of cranky people. This is the vast majority of Albertans who are either saying separate or sympathize or understand the sentiment. So what they're doing is sending us a message that must be taken seriously. If we saw similar numbers emanating from Quebec, it would be the #1 preoccupation of the Ottawa government. And so that is why I've given the Prime Minister a very clear list of short-term things that he could do to demonstrate good faith to Albertans and folks in Saskatchewan That would include a rebate on equalization. Give us back the $1.7 billion that we should be getting through the fiscal stabilization program. Give us a real, actionable guarantee on the construction of the Trans Mountain pipeline expansion project. Help us to create green jobs with something like a flow-through share instrument that would accelerate a reclamation of abandoned wells, or perhaps scalability of the carbon capture, utilization, and storage technology. There's a number of things that we've given the Prime Minister. I hope that the federal government will respond in a positive way to show that they really are concerned about national unity.
Now, Premier, when it comes to the internal politics of your province right now, there's a bit of a controversy in your province. The election commissioner, this legislation that's working its way through that would eliminate the position. It has been said by your critics that it amounts to an obstruction of justice because, of course, the commissioner is taking a look at your party. What would you say to that? Obstruction of justice. What do you say to that?
Well, that charge is completely ridiculous, typical overheated NDP rhetoric. We are not eliminating the position. In fact, we are retaining the position of the Commissioner of Elections. We're simply bringing that office back into the Chief Electoral Officer's ambit, so that instead of two separate, redundant election bureaucracies, we have one, like every other province, with I think one exception, Manitoba. So we are, from 1905 to 2018, the elections law was successfully and fairly administered by the Chief Electoral Officer. That is the case in every other province save one. And in every other province, it's the Chief Electoral Officer, including the federal level, who oversees enforcement and investigations. Secondly, this change will actually enhance the independence of the Elections Commissioner, because he or she will be appointed by the Elections Chief Electoral Officer and not by politicians. That's a conflict of interest. Thirdly, any investigations that are currently underway can and will continue. This in no way impedes investigations. This saves us $1 million. It's part of our broader consolidation of agencies, boards, and commissions. It replicates what every other province in the federal government does, and the practice in Alberta from 1905 to 2018. This is, in my respectful judgment, much ado about nothing.
So you would commit to having this investigation currently of your party seen through to its conclusion, so that people can make up their own minds and hear what the investigation turns out?
I would fully expect that the Chief Electoral Officer and the Commissioner will continue or pursue or launch any investigation that they think is worthy under the law. And that's their decision as a quasi-judicial body. There is zero change in that. This is simply an administrative consolidation of two separate redundant offices that no other province has. It allows the investigations, whatever investigations might be happening, into any party to continue or to begin in the future with zero interference from government.